Hello and welcome to Edison TV. Today I'm speaking to Freddie New, Chief Executive of B HODL PLC. B HODL is a Bitcoin treasury company focused on accumulating and managing Bitcoin and generating revenue from activities such as Lightning node network operations. Freddie, many thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
And can we start by discussing, there are a number of Bitcoin treasury companies out there. How do you differentiate yourself from those businesses?
That's an interesting question. For me, I feel as though the Bitcoin treasury company market is in a continuous process of evolution. And actually, Aquis is a good example. We have a number of different treasury companies on the exchange now, and each of them approach it, I think, in a slightly different way. And one of our key value propositions is that we see ourselves not just as an accumulator of Bitcoin, but also as a user of Bitcoin. So our very business and the business that we use to make money and to generate revenues is itself focused on Bitcoin as well. And in that context, as a treasury company, we're really turning Bitcoin from an asset that you might just buy and hold into an asset that you would use. In other words, we feel that we're on the road to it becoming productive capital rather than passive capital. And you were right in your introduction to focus on our Lightning Network node operations. For anyone unfamiliar with the context of that, it's helpful to think of Bitcoin in payment layers. So the base layer, the blockchain itself that most people will have heard of, is very secure, very robust, but very slow. So one of the common criticisms about Bitcoin is you can never use it as money because it takes 10 minutes to settle a transaction. Now, obviously, when we buy a coffee with a payment card, that settlement isn't instantaneous, but the transaction is. And that instantaneous transaction at a point of sale terminal would ordinarily be routed over the Visa network, the MasterCard network, or the Amex network, for example. The Lightning Network achieves something quite analogous to that in Bitcoin. It enables instantaneous transactions to pass between you and I, or between myself and Starbucks, or other coffee shops are available, obviously. And it really solves the problem of that slow transaction speed, which is a result of Bitcoin's robustness. And it enables Bitcoin to continue really its journey towards being digital money for the internet. And our business model in particular focuses on the need for that Lightning Network to have a number of what are called nodes, which effectively are, I suppose, liquidity providers to that network. And by running those well-capitalized, robust Lightning nodes, we're able to charge a very small fee as payments hop through those nodes. For example, if you were making a payment to someone in El Salvador, let's say, that payment might need to hop through 3 or 4 different nodes to get there. And those might be able to charge a small fee, smaller than Visa and MasterCard, but enough to make it economically worthwhile for our business. So if I had to distill one thing, what differentiates us, it's that focus on Bitcoin as payments as well as the treasury function.
Interesting. And looking back at the treasury function, I guess, can you update us on your Bitcoin purchases?
Sure. So we currently hold just north of 161 Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. And in terms of how we've acquired that, 2 principal means. Firstly, we had a very successful IPO on Aquis. Very pleased with the results there. And our first and biggest purchase was made with the proceeds of the IPO. Secondly, and again, I think this is a differentiating factor for us, we actually earn more Bitcoin every day through our Lightning routing operations. And I should say that's the first of several different revenue generation activities exploring the network that we're looking to progress over the next year or so. And so we've acquired during the few months since our IPO some additional Bitcoin via those routing activities. I'd add that those revenues are actually denominated in Bitcoin. And so an interesting thing for our shareholders is that one of the key metrics for the sector is the Bitcoin per share. We can increase the Bitcoin per share for our shareholders solely as a result of our routing operations.
And turning back to the Lightning Network, can you discuss that in a bit more detail? In particular, how does it work? What did you need to do to set it up? And
Sure.
And yeah, just want to understand that, the setup process and the business model there in a little more detail.
100%. So maybe the first thing to say is that on our team, we've got some of the most experienced and best Lightning and Bitcoin engineers that are working in the UK. So we heavily depend on their expertise as engineers and in the sector. In terms of setting up the process, we started life with a very well capitalized and very well ranked Lightning node, which we acquired on a very long-term lease from Coin Corner, who are one of our key shareholders and supporters. So we hit the ground running with one highly functional node already. And during our first year of operations, we're aiming to build between 5 and 10 other nodes. We're currently sitting at 4. And the process of creating those is relatively slow. So you can't simply dump a huge amount of Bitcoin into a Lightning node and expect it to do terrifically well. The process should be thought of in a more dynamic way. And without going into too much technical detail, think of a Lightning node and a Lightning channel as effectively a bar tab. So let's say if you're running a bar and I come into the bar and I put 100 down. And then during the course of the evening, I can make as many transactions as I like. And at the end of the day, we settle up and it seems as though I've paid £55. So we end up with a 55-45 split. In the Lightning context, that might be thought of as inbound and outbound liquidity. Now, managing inbound and outbound liquidity is a continuous process, and that needs to be carefully optimized and managed. And that's what our engineers are focusing on to ensure really just a couple of things, which is that the Lightning nodes that we're running continue to make as much revenue as they possibly can, and that they're positioned at a junction on the network that is potentially underserved, for example, or through which a lot of payment flow is happening. And that's quite an interesting process. It also means that there's a reasonable barrier to entry for other people learning how to do this. And that's what we're aiming to capitalize on.
And turning to your listing, you were here celebrating the Clusters 2025 on Aquis. You listed in Aquis last year. Can you discuss why you chose Aquis and why that fits with the company at your stage of development?
Well, firstly, we're very, very happy to be on Aquis and very, very happy with the team who've helped us get here. I think for us, I distill it down into a really great combination of a forward-thinking exchange that supports growth businesses, particularly in a technical sector such as ours, and also a high level of compliance and governance. So really we're essentially a startup and a proof of concept business. So for us to have the level of support that we had from Aquis on an exchange that I think the facts will show is probably the premier exchange for this type of business in terms of, I think, the understanding of the team as to what it is we do and the extent to which they were willing to pull out all the stops to ensure that we were able to list with a minimum amount of fuss and difficulty. I think that's it really been a great experience for us.
And in terms of the sort of ongoing benefits of being on the platform, how do you see those in terms of capital raising, partnerships, broader market profile, and so on?
I think being listed here has certainly given us access to other contacts and other professionals in the investment space that we definitely wouldn't have had if we'd remained a private company. So two examples. Today's event is a great one. I'm going to leave this interview and go out into a room full of other potential investors and people in the space. And as I mentioned previously, I think Aquis is in a rather interesting position in that we have a number of different players in the sector, and there'll be a degree of crossover between contacts and potential other sources of capital. I was having a fascinating conversation just before this interview with some members of a Bitcoin mining company, and I want to continue that conversation afterwards because I think there's definitely some interesting synergies and crossovers there. So I think in short, it would be access to a much wider pool of potential investors and professional and industry contacts that we definitely would have had if we were private. And I think an additional thing to say about Aquis is that because it's a smaller exchange, we get quite a high level of individual and personal attention from the team, which is very much appreciated.
Interesting, and certainly it seems as if there's a nice sort of cluster around Bitcoin developing on the Aquis exchange, and you often see things developing well when that happens. You get understanding in the market and so on. What would you say to other companies looking at Aquis as a home at this stage of a certain stage of their development?
I very much recommend it. I think understand the strengths of the exchange and the extent to which those map onto your own abilities and your experiences as a business. So for example, for us as an example, we were in a sector that perhaps an exchange like AIM, for example, wouldn't have understood as well. If that's true of your business, then definitely consider Aquis. It's a fantastic combination, I think, of high quality compliance and governance, but also a level of understanding fit, I think, for a growth market, and certainly for fintech, not fintech, which is a fast moving sector, and one where that level of understanding is very much appreciated by issuers. Certainly in my own experience.
Interesting stuff. Freddie, many thanks for joining me today.
Thanks so much, Anne. Great pleasure to be here. Thank you.